Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the new normal for African Nonprofit Online series. Our guest and our speaker is already on this webinar. Thank you so much for joining in. Okay. All right. So welcome to this webinar. This is our first webinar. This webinar is brought to you, hosted by Impact Institute. A service offering of Chain Story Africa. I'll be telling you about the brands later. And so welcome. I think what we can do is to start with a few ground rules to ensure that we are on the same page so that we have a smooth and seamless session. So please try as much as possible to adhere to the following instructions. Please ensure that your mics are muted at all times. If for any reason you want to speak or contribute, the moderator would have to give you the floor and unmute your mic. If you have questions, please use the Q&A box, it's below your screen. And if you have comments and contributions, please use the chat box. Please, for questions, use the Q&A box. If you use the chat box, I may not be able to get the questions from all the chats and comments and contributions. So thank you once again as we follow those instructions. Okay, so welcome once again. Chain Story Africa is a media brand. It's a media brand that is designed to support Africa's development ecosystem and the social sector. It aims to lead conversations on trends, issues, and people across the continent, with a vision to tell the story of transformation across various regions and economies. Impact Institute, a service offering of Chain Story Africa, is a learning platform that provides key tools and resources for nonprofit and social enterprise leaders. The Institute designs and curates learning opportunities to support and grow the continent's development professionals through periodic and customized initiatives. You would get more information on how you can join our platform at the end of this webinar. So please stay tuned to the end of this webinar. Okay. The new normal for African nonprofits online series is a series that was birthed, designed for the COVID-19 recovery phase to promote learning and learning opportunities for nonprofits and social enterprise leaders. The series is targeted at professionals working in the civil society organizations, government, non-governmental organizations, international non-governmental organizations, social enterprises, and other individuals seeking employment in these sectors. You want to note that this conversation is not just a national conversation. When I say it's not just the Nigerian based conversation, but it's an African-wide conversation. So we have people across borders on this webinar. So what I would like for you to do is let's test run our chat box. And what you can do is drop your country, your state or your province in the chat box. Let's know where you're joining us from. Okay. All right, so I'm checking to see our responses. Okay, so just drop in and please try and mute your mics, please. Okay, that is sorted out. All right, so we want to begin this session, and it's very important. The reason why we decided to take up the theme, the new implications for diversity and gender inclusion, is because it's an area that needs us to re-emphasize. The issues are there, but we have a long way to go in Africa as a continent. And it's very important for individuals, as well as government, as well as businesses, non-governmental organizations, our role and what we need to do post this COVID-19 pandemic. Because even if we don't like it, the new the new economy requires that we have new ways of adapting, new ways of responding to issues, and inclusion is one of the issues that we need to discuss continuously. We have a wonderful guest that has so graciously honored our invitation to be on this webinar. Amy Oyekunle, thank you so much, Ma. Amy, I'll be reading her profile just to give us an introduction about her and her work so far, and we'll go straight to our conversation. Please note if you have questions before we even begin the session, kindly use the Q&A and drop your questions. Okay. Amy Oyekunle is a gender and development professional with 15 years work experience as a gender expert, particularly in adolescent girl-focused and women program design, implementation and evaluation, sexual and gender-based violence, peace building and conflict analysis. She has worked with policymakers, civil society and community-based organizations in Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Ghana. Amy has worked as an independent consultant for international and national organizations, such as UN Women, Social Development Direct UK, Save the Children, British Council, Mercy Corps, Global Fund for Children, and Nigeria's Federal Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development. Since 2015, Amy has worked as consultants engaged by the Federal Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development and UN Women on the development of the second edition National Action Plan for the UNSCR 1325, and subsequently for the development of the second generation State Action Plan in Plateau. This role involved her working closely with the organizations and individuals in the federal and state government MDAs, faith and community-based organizations, as well as donors and development partners, an ardent advocate for gender equality and social justice. Amy is a member of the African Feminist Forum, AFF, and Nigerian Feminist Forum, NFF. Amy has, she has an MA in Development Studies from the University of Leeds, postgraduate diploma in management from the Leeds Metropolitan University, and a Bachelor of Science in Sociology from the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. Thank you so much, Ma, for coming on this session. Okay. All right, we go straight ahead. Okay, I think we have. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for every participant that joined in for this session. We're grateful and we appreciate your presence. Let's go straight ahead to our discussion today. When I started the conversation, I talked about the role of gender and diversity in Africa's development and growth. And it's a topic and a discussion that has been ongoing for years. And sadly, we might say, next year we might have the need to have this conversation. And why this conversation is important is because we just don't want to put the burden on governments and businesses, but as individuals, how are you ensuring gender inclusion? How are you ensuring that there is a balance, so to say? So we'll move straight to our question. Welcome, Amy. Thank you so much. We're going to be asking a few questions. And like I said, if you have questions, please drop it in the Q&A box. Thank you. So while researching on this theme. Okay.
I just wanted to say good afternoon. Thank you so much, Amy. I had a bit of connection issues. This is Emilia. I'm having to use another account to try and log in just to be here. I just wanted to say thank you to Amy. Thank you so much for accepting to do this. And I will just, step back. And I don't want to get in the way of the conversations, but I just thought to welcome everybody and say thank you to Amy. So over to you, Rosemond.
Thank you, Emilia. Emilia Asimita is our practice director at A-Line Media Limited, and she is, the backbone behind this, this brands. Okay, so no, don't worry, I won't go too far. So, okay, so we want to go straight to the conversation, and we want as much as possible that this conversation is an all-rounder. So if you want to contribute, please try as much as possible to use the comment, the chat box, and if you have questions, the Q&A box. So back to you, Amy. I was explaining that there has been a lot of, when preparing for this webinar, I had to research on what is currently happening when it comes to diversity and gender inclusion, and talking about post-COVID, what is the new normal for us? What is the where do we move on from from here? Because there's so much work to be done to ensure that that Africa is growing and that we're developing and we're not left behind when it comes to gender balance. So our first question for you today, and this is not to throw the questions at you as though you have all the solutions, but this is us trying to create a narrative around what this should be and moving forward what we need to do. So I had to go through a report that was written by McKinsey, The Power of Parity, Advancing Women's Equality in Nigeria. And it states that there's been a lot of gender stagnation Africa has lost a lot of opportunities when it comes to ensuring gender inclusion. What do you think are some of the opportunities that Africa has had to ensure gender inclusion? What do you think are some of the opportunities we've missed? And the opportunities we need to explore to ensure gender inclusion in Africa? Over to you.
Thank you, Rosamond. Good afternoon, everyone. Over the last 30 years, 40 something, so over the last 30 years, as long as I can remember, there's been several opportunities, several treaties, conferences, meetings, that has seen the need for gender equality. So basically those meetings started because there was a need. And part of that was women were being left out. And before I start, let me actually do a disclosure. When we talk about gender, we are not only talking about women, and that's a misconception that many of us have, but we emphasize on women because we see that there is a gap when it comes to both sexes, male and female. So with that context, there's been several events, conferences, occasions where governments of different countries across the world have come together, African countries, the African countries included, to say, what can we do? What do we need to do to ensure that we are filling this gap, the issue of gender inequality? And the first that I can remember, there were probably several before that, but the first I can remember was the Beijing Platform for Action, which was in 1995. I can't remember how old I was then, but a lot of women in Nigeria, where we are, went for that conference. And it was, for many, the landmark conference where they identified 12 factors to say, look, we have seen what the issues are, and we want to focus on these 12 areas of concern. I will read out some. There were education, women in education. There were women in health, violence against women, women in armed conflict, women and the economy, women, power and decision making, women and the environment, and the girl child. There were many more, 12. But they focused on this 12 because they said, these are the factors. If we get this right, if we put certain measures and mechanisms and structures in place, if we pass policies and laws, then we are almost on the way to ensuring gender equality. There was another occasion, MDGs, as many of us know, where they set up certain goals to say, we need to meet this by, I think at the time it was 2015. We now have the SDGs, which are 17 goals, and out of which we have about almost 8 of them focusing around equality, but 3 or 4 on gender equality. So there are many opportunities, but having said that, there is still a gap, and today is 2020. There's still huge gap with regards to inequality for women. There's a gap when you talk about access to education. There's a gap when you talk about the workplace, women in the workplace. There's a gap when you talk about financial inclusion. There's a gap when you talk about equal pay. And for many countries, we sign up to these treaties. We sign up. Nigeria is one of those countries that has signed up to the Maputo Protocol. Many countries in Africa have signed up to those protocols. And those protocols basically say that government in those countries must institute policies and laws, actions, institutions, must have what they call a gender responsive budget to be able to handle it. And what we see is that in many cases, when our governments sign up to these protocols and these policies, they come back and they lie fallow for a certain period. Sometimes they are implemented or domesticated, but they are done haphazardly. They are done in a way that makes one question, why did you sign it in the first place? So it's not enough to say you signed this policy. Our country has, we've signed up to CEDAW, we've signed up to CEDAW. And how many years later, we're still trying to push for the domestication of CEDAW in Nigeria. We've signed up to Child Rights Act. And till today in Nigeria, we do not have all the states practicing or domesticate that are implementing Child Rights Act for one various reason or the other. So the question begins to say, what is our priority? And we need to understand that when you talk about gender equality, it's not a word that a phrase that you should throw out there just because it is the slang. It is something that we really need to consider, because everything that is affecting our continent today as we speak, hinges on ensuring that we have gender equality. Most of the issues that if we have parity will almost not be existent. Let's take, for instance, what is happening now with COVID-19. Everywhere globally, it's affected. And I see I've read of research where in a lot of this research, they say the countries that were able to do significantly better when it came to preparing adequately, putting structures and policies, or even responsive COVID-19 response, were countries that had female leaders. Now, some of us can say that's a lie. Some of us can say, oh, we don't agree with that, but the results are there for you to see. Let's speak about, and forgive me if I keep on using Nigeria, I live in Nigeria, I'm Nigerian. But even in Nigeria today, one of the biggest challenges with regards to the COVID-19 response was the way it didn't include, it wasn't gendered. It didn't include any form of gender responsiveness at all. It was get up and go. It was, if you look at the response, the plan team, women had to scream at the top of their lungs to say, where are the women? They were dealing on issues of sexual and gender-based violence, which we all knew that this was going to happen. And we were screaming, make SGBV, sexual and gender-based violence, an issue, make the services, call them essential services. That wasn't done. It took a lot of the cases for coming out for governments, for independent governments like Lagos, for example, to say, okay, we consider this an essential service. And so some of the challenges around gender is because of lack of political will. Now, the new normal, which is your question, Rosamond, is going forward, especially in light of COVID-19. Dare I say it would be really foolhardy for any country to say we wouldn't use this opportunity provided by COVID-19 to reassess our priorities, to look at how we are funding institutions, to look at how we are including the voices of different people, cut across ages, cut across generations, cut across gender. It would be almost silly to say you wouldn't use this opportunity provided to do that. Unfortunately, I can't say that many would take this as a lesson and do that. So I'll stop there for other questions to come.
Okay, thank you. Oh my. Okay, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for your response. I think I took a few things down, and you sort of answered other questions that we have, listed out for you today. And well, it shows that we're kind of we're on the same page, based on the discussion we're having today. So I want to know, when we say that we are advocating for better inclusion and for diversity, if you look at the workplace, in government, wherever, what do you think are the most important areas that we often ignore when we are advocating for inclusion and diversity?
I think that first and foremost is what we always ignore is a deeper understanding or analysis of the gendered nature of whether it's the workplace or wherever we exist. We need to understand what the issues are, which guides how we advocate for inclusion and diversity. And this is why I say that. I come from the field of working for or pushing for women's political leadership, women's inclusion in decision making. And I remember when I started in 2009, in Nigerian political history, those were significant times. 2006, those were significant times. It was immediately after Nigeria came into democracy, after how many years of military rule. There were many organizations pushing for women's involvement in political leadership in elections. And at that time, we had a significant amount of women coming out to contest for elections. So obviously, diversity, inclusion, women were being included. But usually what you find is over the years, sometimes even before they get to elections itself, they are weeded out before they even get to that point. They're weeded out from their party politics. They're weeded out when it comes to even different things around barriers affecting them. And then by the time they get to elections, one or two. And when you have a National Assembly or an assembly of over 100 people, and maybe only 2 are women, what impact do you think can be made by these women? And so women are included in a way, but it is not as inclusive. And some of the things that we are missing is that even among women or even among men, there's a diversity. So we're looking at young people. How are they included? Whether it is at the workplace, whether it is in decision making, whether it is in health. There's a campaign at the moment that is going on, global campaign on health, where while we see that over 70% of health workers are women, they are, when it comes to leadership, they are missing at that particular point. So when we talk about what are we missing, it is a careful analysis and understanding of the gendered nature and the intersectionalities around that for us to be able to put in place proper structures for us to advocate better. Now, one of the things I would say is that nothing is not all doom and gloom with our continent. There have been several progress that has been made around issues of gender equality. We see in countries like Rwanda, in South Africa, there's been an increase, significant increase. In Rwanda, we have 60% and counting. In South Africa, over 48% of women in leadership. But another thing that we need to look at when we talk about inclusion and diversity is the quality of that inclusion and diversity. So I think that one of the things that we miss out is just questioning what we mean by inclusion and diversity. We all take it to heart. Let us include women, let us include young people, let us include men. When they get in there, what is the quality of their voice? What is the quality of their participation? How enabling is that environment for them in the first place?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amy. There's, I think a few things that I took out from your response is the fact that we need to understand the issue. before we go, setting up structures and, policies, to drive that issue. But another question would be in that same line. Do you think that there are low-hanging fruits or quick wins to drive this awareness? That is, if you think that, education is one of the game changers for when you talk about diversity and gender inclusion.
Well, to answer your question, Rosamond, there are always game changers. Every opportunity presents game changer if you have the right mindset to do so. Education, which is what we used to hang on in the past, will always continue to be a game changer. And when you say low-hanging fruit, to be honest, I'm not sure how I would quantify that. What I would say is that for me, it goes beyond just providing education for education's sake, and more about the quality of education. Today, in many African continents, the issue of education for girl children there's an increased rate of enrollment, although we still have many girls that are not in school, and in many countries, boys as well, especially countries that are affected by conflict, countries that are at the moment going through emergency crisis. So we have that issue. But in rethinking it, in re-strategizing, which is done at different levels, whether it is at the regional, national, state level, how are we ensuring that this education that we are providing for, that donors are funding, that everybody wants to come together, how are we sure that this education is being very gender responsive? I used to give a joke when I speak about how I put my children in school, and my son came home one day and he was singing a song about, I love my mommy, I love my daddy, I love them so dearly. Mommy cares for me and daddy provides for me. I love them so dearly. And of course, as every mother, oh, that's a good song, and